Sometimes the loudest move you can make is choosing not to speak. We live in a world that demands noise, constant explaining, proving, posting, defending, but there's a sacred power in stillness. There's a divine strategy in silence. See, when you stop trying to control everything with your words and start trusting God with your worship, you create space for Him to move. You don't have to force what's already written. You don't have to chase what's already yours. If you can just stay silent, stay faithful, stay aligned, what is meant for you will not pass you by. It will come naturally in God's time, in God's way. Because the same God who formed you in the quiet of the womb is the same God who will fulfill you in the silence of your surrender. In a culture that equates volume with value and visibility with validation, the idea that silence is strength feels countercultural, almost rebellious. We are conditioned to believe that if we're not speaking up, we're being overlooked. If we're not defending ourselves, we're being defeated. But there is a different kind of power that doesn't need to be loud to be strong. It's the power that comes from within. It's the strength that grows in the quiet, that matures in the hidden places, and that doesn't feel the need to announce itself. Silence, when chosen with wisdom, is not weakness. It's restraint. It's discernment. It's the confidence to know that everything does not require your response, and every attack does not deserve your reaction. There's something sacred about knowing when to speak and when to stay still. When you stay silent, not because you're afraid, but because you're aware, you begin to operate on a different frequency. You stop reacting from your flesh and start responding from your spirit. You stop letting the noise around you dictate your peace within you. That is strength. That is maturity. That is spiritual power. And the enemy is terrified of someone who can remain calm when chaos erupts, someone who doesn't flinch when they're provoked, someone who refuses to be baited into battles they've already won in prayer. Because silence chosen wisely signals that you know who you are and whose you are. You're no longer trying to prove yourself to people who never had the capacity to understand you. You're no longer explaining your purpose to people who weren't in the room when God gave you the vision. Silence becomes strength when you use it to listen, not just to others, but to God. In the stillness, your ears are tuned to hear the whisper of heaven. You begin to recognize that God often speaks in the quiet. Elijah didn't find God in the wind, the fire, or the earthquake, but in the gentle whisper. That means if your life is too loud, too cluttered, too crowded with commentary, you might miss the very direction you're praying for. Sometimes God will silence your voice so He can elevate His own. And if you're mature enough to accept that, you'll realize silence isn't a punishment, it's preparation, it's positioning, it's power under control. There's strength in choosing silence when your ego wants to speak, when your flesh wants to clap back, when your pride wants to post a response, send a text, call someone out, or let them know you're not the one. But the Spirit says, be still, I've got it. That's when your silence becomes worship. That's when your silence becomes trust. That's when your silence is louder than any argument you could have made. It says, I don't need to fight this battle because the battle is not mine, it belongs to the Lord. That strength, not just the kind of strength that wins arguments, but the kind that wins peace, the kind that builds character, the kind that invites breakthrough. Silence also protects what is sacred. There are some things God is doing in your life that don't need to be shared prematurely. Some breakthroughs require secrecy. Some growth requires darkness. Just like a seed. Just because it's quiet doesn't mean nothing's happening. In fact, some of God's greatest works begin in silence. Jesus was silent before Pilate. He didn't defend himself. He didn't justify his mission. He understood the purpose was greater than the moment. That's strength. That's divine strategy. Because when you know how the story ends, you don't have to argue with people stuck in the middle of it. You don't have to break your silence to be seen. You're already known in heaven. And let's not confuse silence with suppression. There's a difference between being voiceless and being wise with your voice. This is not about being passive. It's about being powerful enough to pause. It's about being spiritually grounded enough to discern that your peace is more valuable than your pride. When you're grounded in who God says you are, you no longer live to be understood. You live to be obedient. And obedience sometimes looks like holding your tongue when everything in you wants to speak. It looks like walking away when you want to argue. It looks like trusting God's timing over your need for closure. That's not weakness. That's strength refined by fire. Strength in silence doesn't always look impressive on the outside. It's not flashy. It doesn't go viral, but it has deep roots. It's the kind of strength that doesn't break when storms come. It's the kind that allows you to walk through betrayal without bitterness, rejection without retaliation, and delay without desperation. It's a quiet confidence that says, I don't need to respond because God will reveal. I don't need to announce my next move because God is already ordering my steps. That kind of silence is terrifying to the enemy because it means he can't manipulate you through noise. You're no longer driven by opinions, applause, or attacks. You're driven by truth. You begin to realize that not every invitation to speak is worth accepting. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every conflict needs your participation. And that's where the freedom comes in. You stop being a slave to reaction. You start living from a place of rest, of rootedness, of resolve. Because silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the presence of wisdom. It's an act of spiritual warfare. It's you telling the enemy, you can't shake me. You can't move me. I've got a God who sees me, and he will handle what I want. Divine alignment doesn't need public approval. That statement alone can shake the foundations of how we often measure success, purpose, and progress. We live in a time where everything is on display. Every achievement, every decision, every move, we post, we share, we wait for likes, comments, and applause to validate what we already knew in our spirit. But true divine alignment isn't up for a vote. It doesn't need consensus. It doesn't require a round of applause. When God has aligned something in your life, your purpose, your next move, your healing, your elevation, it doesn't have to make sense to the crowd. It only has to be faithful to the calling. God doesn't always choose to work in the spotlight. In fact, he does his best work in the shadows. When he aligned David to be king, he didn't start with a public announcement. He started in a field, alone, overlooked, uninvited, but chosen. That's what divine alignment looks like, being chosen by God. Even when you're ignored by people, it's being appointed when no one's paying attention. And that kind of favor doesn't need a platform. It just needs obedience. Because when you are aligned with God's will, no opinion can overrule his decision. No criticism can cancel his calling. No rejection can block his release. Divine alignment is about surrender, not popularity. It's about walking in the will of God, even when no one understands where you're going. Sometimes the need for approval becomes a distraction from alignment. We start adjusting our pace, our voice, even our faith to gain acceptance from people who were never assigned to our destiny. You begin to shrink your spirit to fit into spaces God already called you out of. You silence your convictions so you can sit at tables God never asked you to dine at. But divine alignment will always demand separate. It will call you to walk away from validation and into revelation. And when you truly understand that, you stop chasing applause and start chasing assignment. You realize that God's yes is enough, even if everyone else says no. You understand that if heaven is backing you, no earthly resistance can stop what's coming. People may not understand your silence. They may call you distant, withdrawn, or even lost. But what they can see is the conversation happening between your soul and God. They don't hear the instructions that don't come with explanations. They don't see the wrestling in your spirit as you align yourself with a purpose greater than your personality. And so you learn not to take it personally when people don't approve of what they don't understand. They weren't in the secret place when God laid the foundation. They weren't there when he healed you privately, restored you silently, anointed you quietly. So why should they have the authority to confirm what they didn't create? Divine alignment requires the maturity to walk alone, to walk away, to walk without the need for constant affirmation, because alignment doesn't feel like attention. It feels like peace. It feels like clarity. It feels like knowing you're exactly where you need to be, even if no one claps for you. It feels like finally saying yes to God, even if it means saying no to the crowd. That kind of alignment won't always come with public celebration, but it will always come with divine confirmation, a whisper in your spirit, a sudden peace that makes no sense, a door opening that you didn't even knock on. That's how you know it's God. When God aligns you, he also protects you. Sometimes the silence is not just about self-discipline, it's divine shielding. God will hide you in plain sight to protect what's growing inside of you. He'll block platforms because your character is still developing. He'll silence your voice because your heart is still healing. He'll isolate you not to punish you, but to prepare you. And in that preparation, he removes the need for public approval. He breaks the addiction to applause. He detoxes you from people pleasing. Because if you're going to carry out his purpose, you have to be delivered from the opinions of man. Divine alignment is uncomfortable because it often disrupts the systems we relied on to feel accepted. We grew up thinking we needed to fit in to be worthy. We believed that approval was a sign of success. So when God starts shifting things, removing people, changing circles, altering paths, we can panic, we can start second guessing. But the pruning is proof that alignment is taking place. He's not punishing you, he's positioning you. He's removing what doesn't match where you're going, because divine alignment doesn't just bring blessing, it brings order. And order often starts with subtraction. When you stop needing approval, you start gaining authority. Because you're no longer looking horizontally for what only comes vertically. You stop waiting for people to co-sign what God already signed. You start walking in the boldness of someone who knows they've been appointed for such a time as this, even if your path looks unfamiliar. Even if your journey is misunderstood, even if your silence is criticized, you're not following trends. You're following truth. And truth doesn't shift based on popular opinion. Truth stands. Truth endures. Truth aligns you with heaven's agenda, even when the earth hasn't caught up yet. There's a sacred boldness that comes when you're aligned with God. You stop over-explaining. You stop defending decisions rooted in prayer. You stop begging people to see you because you know God already does. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. You no longer walk into rooms wondering if you belong. You walk in carrying the authority of your assignment. You speak when God says speak. You stay silent when he says wait. That's divine alignment. It's not passive, it's intentional. It's not proud, it's anchored. And it cannot be faked because it comes from a place of surrender. It's in that surrender that you find freedom. Freedom from the pressure to be impressive. Freedom from the fear of being misunderstood. Freedom from the weight of living for likes. You begin to crave presence over platform. You start choosing obedience over opportunity. And slowly your spirit becomes aligned with heaven's rhythm. You stop rushing what God is still developing. You stop questioning what God has already confirmed, and you find rest in the reality that you don't need to be seen by many when you've been chosen by one. Stillness is not passivity. It is the crucible where your heart's cry meets heaven's whisper. In the quiet, you begin to peel away the layers of noise opinions, expectations, the endless buzzing of social media updates, and you find yourself face to face with the raw, unfiltered truth of who you really are and what you were created for. When you pause long enough to listen, you'll discover that God's voice is not hidden in the crowd, but in the calm. He speaks in the gentle hush that follows a storm, the breath between your anxieties, the space between two heartbeats. In that sacred silence, the clutter of confusion falls away and clarity emerges like dawn breaking over the horizon. You realize the path you've been stumbling toward was never meant to be discovered in the flashing lights of approval, but in the stillness of surrender. In stillness, distractions lose their power. The demands of the world clamor for your attention, deadlines to meet, milestones to hit, notifications to answer. But when you refuse to be hurried, when you refuse to obey the tyranny of urgency, your spirit recalibrates. You see, that direction isn't dictated by the loudest voice in the room or the most trending hashtag. It's given by the one who authored your story. You begin to discern the difference between your own good ideas and God's best instructions. You start to recognize that the whispers of destiny are drowned out by the roar of busyness. And so you choose stillness, not as an afterthought, but as strategy. You build margins in your schedule, carve out pockets of solitude, and consecrate moments of silence so that your soul can catch up with your calling. Stillness also teaches you patience. When you sit quietly before the Lord, pressing in without an agenda, you learn to wait on His timing. You discover that moving in your own strength often leads to detours, but waiting in His strength guides you straight. There is a sacred tension in waiting, a holy space where your faith stretches and your trust deepens. You may not see the whole staircase, but you feel the sure footing beneath your feet because you've paused long enough to catch the promise that carries you forward. Clarity doesn't always come with immediate instruction. Sometimes it comes with the peace of knowing you're exactly where you need to be, even if the map hasn't been fully revealed. In that quiet place, God begins to rearrange the furniture of your heart. He brings old wounds to the surface so they can be healed, revives dreams that were buried under the rubble of disappointment, and ignites passions that were suffocated by the insistence of external noise. Without space, these processes get crowded out. But in stillness, restoration has room to breathe. You'll feel the gentle unburdening of your soul as layers of fear and insecurity fall away. You'll find the courage to look back at the hurdles you've overcome and realize that each one was preparing you for the next step. Clarity often arrives in the form of remembrance. God showing you that His faithfulness in the past is the foundation for your future. And direction comes when you connect the dots of His goodness, even if the picture isn't complete. Moreover, stillness aligns your priorities with heaven's priorities. When life is noisy, you juggle so many tasks that you forget your primary assignment, loving God and loving people. But when you slow down, you remember what truly matters. You look into the mirror of your soul and ask, am I living in a way that reflects the kingdom? You realize that success isn't measured by the number of followers or the size of your bank account, but by the depth of your intimacy with God and the impact of your compassion toward others. You see opportunities that were hiding in plain sight, an outstretched hand, a lonely neighbor, a hurting friend, and your direction becomes service. You reframe your ambitions through the lens of eternal value rather than temporal validation. Stillness also sharpens your spiritual senses. In the busyness of life, you become dull. You walk in autopilot, reacting rather than responding. But when you quiet the external and internal chatter, your spirit awakens. You sense God's presence in ordinary moments, a sunrise, a child's laughter, a gentle breeze. And you recognize His guidance in the nudges of your conscience, the impressions of peace, the convictions of righteousness. You start to distinguish between the prompting of fear and the leading of faith. You learn that the Holy Spirit's direction is never panicked, never rushed, never confusing. It is steady, deliberate, and often accompanied by a deep and abiding calm. In that sharpness of spirit, you find the wisdom to make decisions that honor your calling rather than indulge your comfort zones. And let's not underestimate the power of communal stillness. When you gather with others in silence, no scripted prayers, no programmed worship, just raw openness, you create sacred space for corporate clarity. There's a collective hush that invites God's presence. And in that reverent quiet, destinies merge and align. You hear the burdens of others and the heartbeats of unity. You sense what needs to shift in your ministry, your family, your community. Shared stillness amplifies revelation because it multiplies focus. When a room full of believers stops talking long enough to listen, heaven breaks through in tangible ways. Words of knowledge, fresh vision, collective strategy. But the most transformative clarity and direction come when you make stillness a daily habit. It's not a retreat you attend once a year. It's a rhythm you practice every morning, every afternoon, every night. It's the intentional refusal to let your calendar fill up without breathing room for the voice that matters above all. It's the spiritual discipline that says, first things first, I will seek your face before I chase any favor. And as you cultivate that daily encounter, you'll notice that decisions get easier, directions get clearer, and purpose gets brighter. Life will still have noise, but it can no longer drown out the song in your soul because you've learned to tune into the divine melody playing beneath it all. Clarity and direction will cease to be distant aspirations and become the air you breathe each day in the still, sacred space where heaven meets earth. What's meant for you flows without force. That truth dismantles the lie that you have to hustle, manipulate, or strive your way into purpose. When you are aligned with what God has ordained for your life, there is a natural rhythm to it. Not always easy, not without effort, but never forced. It moves with grace. It unfolds in divine timing. It opens up like a river, finding its path, cutting through obstacles, not by aggression, but by persistence and purpose. You don't have to chase it. It recognizes you. You don't have to beg for it. It's already assigned to your name. And when it arrives, it won't feel like something you manufactured. It'll feel like something you were always meant to walk in. There's something powerful about letting go of the need to make everything happen. The world teaches you to push harder, climb faster, shout louder, and brand yourself better, but the Spirit teaches you to flow, to follow the nudges, to obey the pauses, to trust the redirections. You begin to realize that the more you force it, the more you fight the very grace that's trying to carry you. When God opens a door, it doesn't come with anxiety, it comes with peace. When God brings a connection, it doesn't come with chaos, it comes with clarity. What's meant for you won't ask you to compromise your values or your rest to obtain it. It won't demand that you lose your soul to gain the world. It will come in alignment with your identity, not at the cost of it. Flow doesn't mean there won't be resistance, but it means you're not wrestling to prove something that's already been approved in heaven. You're not striving to hold together something God never built. You're not forcing a season to stay open that God already closed. Flow means you're in sync with the divine current. And even when it's hard, it's right. Even when it stretches you, it strengthens you. You're no longer drained by constantly trying to make it happen. You're empowered by simply letting it happen. And that shift from force to flow is where true faith lives. It's where miracles meet maturity. It's where results meet rest. Many times we confuse ambition with purpose. We confuse striving with excellence. We confuse pressure with productivity. But there's a difference between moving with intention and forcing a future that isn't yours. When you're walking in your God-ordained lane, doors open not just for visibility, but for impact. Resources show up. People show up. Support flows in. And it's not always glamorous or grand, but it is real. It is stable. It is fruitful. It lasts. Forced things can't hold up under pressure. But what flows from heaven is sustained by heaven. You don't have to panic to preserve it. You don't have to perform to maintain it. You simply have to steward it well and remain faithful. This is especially true in relationships. When a connection is forced, it will drain you. It will cost you more than it gives. You'll feel the imbalance in your spirit long before you see it in your circumstances. But when a relationship flows, whether a friendship, mentorship, or marriage, it edifies you. It challenges you without condemning you. It grows you without controlling you. You don't have to beg someone to see you, to value you, to understand you. They'll recognize the divine fingerprint on your life and move accordingly. That's flow. That's favor. That's what it looks like when God writes the script. You'll also see the power of flow in your creative life, your career, your calling, when you stop forcing yourself into roles that don't fit, rooms that don't feel right, or rhythms that wear you down. You make room for what does fit. You start walking in the grace assigned to you. You stop comparing your timeline to someone else's and begin honoring your own. You stop pushing to catch up and start listening for the instructions that make everything clear. You notice how your gifts begin to make room for you, not because you manipulated an opportunity, but because you mastered the discipline of waiting for the right one. There is rest and flow, not laziness, not complacency, but holy rest. A peace that reminds you that you don't have to build an empire to prove you're worthy. You are already enough because God already said so. You don't have to compete to be seen. You don't have to hustle for grace. You just have to walk in the awareness that what's meant for you is already in motion. Every day you choose obedience over striving. Every day you choose presence over panic. Every day you choose trust over tactics. You are flowing in the direction of your destiny. It may not look spectacular, but it's sacred. It may not look fast, but it's faithful. Flow looks like ideas coming from a place of stillness, not stress. It looks like favor finding you where you are instead of you chasing it down. It looks like connections forming organically, aligned in values and vision. It looks like progress that feels peaceful, not pressured. It looks like doors opening without you banging on them. It feels like being pulled by something greater than you, not pushed by fear or comparison. That's when you know it's divine. That's when you know the flow is from God. When you begin to trust the flow, you stop panicking in the pauses. You realize that delays aren't denials, they're divine pacing. You learn that silence doesn't mean abandonment, it means preparation. You start to see that closed doors aren't rejection, they're redirection. That mindset shift frees you from constantly trying to control the narrative. You don't need to manipulate circumstances to protect your future. What's meant for you is protected by God Himself. What's yours can't be stolen, delayed, or destroyed unless you step out of alignment trying to force what was never meant to be. Flow teaches surrender. It teaches you that success isn't always loud and purpose isn't always polished. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's slow, but it's real. It's steady, it's eternal. You begin to release things faster, people, opportunities, timelines, because you know if it's not flowing, it's not fitting. You stop trying to hold together things that are falling apart. Not because you gave up, but because you woke up. You realize that grace doesn't grind, grace grows, it builds, it multiplies, it flows. You begin to pray differently. You don't just pray for open doors, you pray for right doors. You don't just ask for speed, you ask for discernment. You don't just cry out for success, you cry out for alignment. And in that posture, God can trust you with more because he knows you won't force it. You'll follow him. You'll wait. You'll flow. You won't settle for anything less than what heaven has already spoken over you. You won't manipulate moments to feel significant. You'll trust that significance is already woven into your story, and it will find you, flow to you, and settle on you like oil from the throne of grace.